The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the golden grasslands. The air was warm, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant rain. Birds called lazily from the acacia trees, their songs fading as the night approached. 5-year-old Emily walked along the narrow dirt path, her tiny fingers clutching a small metal bucket. She was humming a tune, a soft lullaby her mother sang to her every night. The well was just a short distance from her home, a place she had visited hundreds of times before. But tonight, something felt different. The sky, once a peaceful canvas of orange and pink, darkened rapidly. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass on either side of the path. Emily paused for a moment, her blue eyes scanning the empty land ahead. She was young, but she wasn't naive. Her mother always warned her to be careful. There were dangers in the wild, she said. But those dangers had always been animals, never people. Emily pressed on, her little feet kicking up dust as she reached the well. She placed her bucket on the ground and turned the crank, listening to the creak of the old wooden pulley. The bucket descended, the rope stretching tight as it disappeared into the darkness below. Then she heard it, a rustling in the grass. Her small hands froze on the crank, her breath hitching in her throat. The sound was too heavy to be the wind, too slow to be a wild animal. It was deliberate, a whisper, then a chuckle. Emily's heart pounded. She turned slowly, her fingers gripping the wooden frame of the well. In the fading light, she saw them, 3 men stepping out from the tall grass. Their faces were shadowed, but their eyes glinted with something cold, something dangerous. "Out here all alone, little girl?" one of them sneered, taking a step closer. Emily took a shaky step backward, her tiny frame trembling. Her mother's warnings echoed in her head. Never talk to strangers. Never go anywhere with them. I have to go home," she stammered, reaching for her bucket. One of the men lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. She screamed. The sound was sharp, piercing through the vast emptiness of the savannah. But there was no one to hear her. No one except something hidden in the shadows. The men laughed as she struggled, their grip tightening. She kicked, tried to bite, but she was too small, too weak. One of them grabbed her around the waist, lifting her off the ground. Then a growl, deep, guttural, the kind that vibrates through the bones and chills the blood. The laughter stopped. The air grew thick with something primal, fear. Emily, her eyes wide with terror, felt it before she saw it. The presence, the sheer weight of something watching. Then, from the darkness of the tall grass, he emerged. A lion, massive, golden for shimmering in the dim light, muscles rippling beneath his thick coat. His amber eyes locked onto the men, unblinking. His ears flattened and his lips curled back, revealing long, gleaming fangs. The man holding Emily froze. No one moved. The only sound was the wind whispering through the grass and the lion's slow, measured breathing. Then he roared. It wasn't just a sound. It was a force, a primal declaration of dominance that shook the very ground beneath them. The man let go of Emily so fast she hit the ground with a thud. The others stumbled back, their bravado evaporating like mist under the scorching sun. One of them muttered something, a prayer, maybe, before they turned and ran. Emily gasped, her tiny body shaking as she scrambled backward. She should have run too. She should have screamed for help. But she didn't, because the lion, her savior, was looking at her, and in his gaze there was no hunger, no malice, only something strange, something she couldn't quite understand. Compassion. She didn't know how long she sat there, staring into the eyes of the beast. Seconds? Minutes? It didn't matter. The lion took a slow step forward. Then another. Emily whimpered, scooting back until her hands met the rough wooden planks of the well. But the lion didn't pounce. He simply sat. He let out a low, rumbling sound, not a growl, but something softer, reassuring. Emily's breathing steadied, though her tiny hands still trembled. The lion stayed. He didn't leave. He sat there, between her and the darkness where the men had fled, watching, waiting. Emily, clutching her knees to her chest, realized something. He wasn't there to hurt her. He was there to protect her. And in that moment, In the quiet embrace of the night, surrounded by nothing but the endless savanna, a bond was formed, a bond between a child and a king, a bond between innocence and power, a bond that would change her life forever. The night was silent, except for the rustling of the tall grass and the soft, steady breathing of the lion. He sat just a few feet away from Emily, his golden eyes fixed on the darkness where the men had fled. His presence, though massive and terrifying, felt strangely safe. Emily, still trembling, wrapped her arms around her knees. Her small chest rose and fell in quick, uneven breaths. She wanted to run home, but her legs felt like stone, frozen in both fear and awe. She had always heard stories about lions. Her father used to tell her they were the kings of the savannah, powerful and ruthless hunters. But this one had saved her. He had chased away the bad man. And now, he just sat there, watching over her as if she were one of his own. Slowly, hesitantly, Emily moved. She pushed herself up on shaky legs, her tiny feet pressing into dry earth. The lion's ears twitched, his gaze shifting to her, but he did not move. He only observed. Emily swallowed hard. I have to go home, she whispered. The lion blinked. She took a step back, then another. Still, he didn't move. Then, just as she turned to run, he rose. His powerful muscles rippled beneath his fur as he stood, towering over her. Emily's heart pounded. For a brief, terrifying moment, she thought he might attack. But instead, he took a step forward, slowly, carefully, and he followed her. Emily's breath hitched. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but something deeper told her to stay calm. So, gripping her little bucket tightly, she began walking back toward her village, and the lion walked beside her. His massive paws made no sound against the earth, his movements smooth and effortless. He did not crowd her, did not push forward. He simply kept pace, his watchful eyes scanning the darkness around them. Emily glanced at him, her fear melting into something else, something warm. He was guarding her. She didn't understand why, but she didn't question it. The journey home was slow, each step careful and uncertain. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant calls of hyenas and the soft hoots of night birds. Emily's village was not far, just beyond the small hill in the distance. She could see the faint glow of firelight flickering between the trees. As they neared, the familiar wooden huts and stone pathways came into view. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the sounds of quiet conversation drifted through the air. Then, a scream. Emily flinched as she heard it. The moment the villagers spotted her and the lion walking side by side, panic erupted. "Emily!" a woman shrieked. "It's a lion!" someone else shouted. Within seconds, men rushed forward with torches and spears, their faces twisted in fear and anger. Get away from it. Kill it before it attacks a girl. Emily's father, a tall man with strong hands and kind eyes, pushed through the crowd. His face was pale with horror. "Emily, run!" Emily turned, her little hands outstretched. "No, don't hurt him." But the men weren't listening. They advanced with their weapons raised, ready to strike. The lion stood his ground. He did not snarl. He did not charge. He simply watched them, his golden eyes calm but firm. Emily ran forward, placing herself between the lion and the villagers. "Stop. He saved me." Her father froze. "What?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "The bad men, 3 of them, they tried to take me, but he scared them away. He protected me." The villagers hesitated. They exchanged uncertain glances, their grips on their weapons tightening. "She's confused," an older man muttered. "Lions don't protect humans." Emily shook her head furiously. "But he did." The lion, still silent, lowered his massive body to the ground. His ears twitched as he watched the humans around him, his tail flicking lazily. He was not afraid. He was not hostile. Her father knelt beside her, his eyes scanning her small face for any signs of harm. "Emily, did they hurt you?" She shook her head. "No, because of him." Her father exhaled sharply, his hands trembling as he touched her shoulder. Then, slowly he turned to the lion. The great beast met his gaze, and for a long, tense moment, There was nothing but silence. Then, the lion did something no one expected. He closed his eyes. A long, slow blink, a sign of trust. Emily's father's breath caught in his throat. He had seen lions before, feared them, fought them, but never had he seen one behave like this. "He's not here to hurt us," he murmured. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, unsure. Some still gripped their weapons, unwilling to lower them. Emily turned back to the lion and, for the first time since that night began, she smiled. "Can he stay?" she asked. Her father hesitated. The lion lifted his head slightly, his golden mane shimmering in the firelight. He was waiting, watching, and in that moment, something became clear. This was no ordinary lion. This was something else. A guardian, a protector, a king who had chosen her. Her father took a deep breath, then looked down at Emily. "Let's see what happens," he said. And as the night settled over the village, the lion stayed, watching, waiting, guarding the little girl who had become his own. The village had never known a night like this. Whispers filled the air, flickering torches casting uneasy shadows against the mud-brick walls. Women clutched their children close, peeking from behind doorways, while the men stood in tense silence, spears gripped tight, eyes fixed on the lion. Emily sat beside him. Despite the murmurs of fear, despite the lingering tension, she wasn't afraid. She had spent the night alone with this lion, seen his power and his mercy. He wasn't like the monsters in the stories told to scare children into obedience. He was her protector. Her father stood with the village elders, his gaze shifting between his daughter and the massive creature beside her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "We cannot keep a lion in the village," he said, voice firm but calm. "He is still a wild animal. We must send him away." Emily's heart clenched. "No, he saved me. You can't just chase him off." A murmur spread through the villagers. Some nodded in agreement with her father, while others, though fearful, seemed unsure. Then an older woman stepped forward, Grandmother Miriam. She was the village's eldest, her face lined with the wisdom of many seasons. She stepped close to the lion, her dark eyes studying him with quiet intensity. "He does not act like a normal lion," she murmured. The crowd hushed. She took another step closer. Most people would never dare approach a lion at this distance, but Grandmother Miriam was different. She had always believed in things beyond logic, in spirits, in fate, in the whispers of the earth itself. She extended a trembling hand. The villagers gasped. The lion did not move. No growl, no lunge. Instead, he blinked slowly, a sign of peace. Grandmother Miriam exhaled and turned to the others. "This is no ordinary beast." Emily grabbed onto that. "See? He's different. He's here for a reason." Her father rubbed his temples, exhaustion clear in his expression. "Emily, he may not have hurt you, but he's still a lion. He belongs in the wild." Emily's small hands balled into fists. "Then why did he save me? Why is he still here?" Silence. No one had an answer. The lion, seemingly unfazed by the tension around him, lay down with a quiet huff, his massive paws stretched in front of him. He was not leaving. A decision had to be made. Finally, Grandmother Miriam nodded. "For now, we watch. We see what happens. If he becomes a danger, we act." Emily beamed. "Thank you." But her father's worry did not fade. He looked at the lion once more before sighing. "One night," he said. "Just one." The villagers murmured but did not argue. It was the best compromise they would get. Emily sat beside the lion as the village slowly returned to their homes, though few found sleep that night. The lion, however, did not sleep. He watched, even when Emily finally drifted off, curled up beside him beneath the open sky. His ears twitched at every sound. His amber eyes never fully closed. And just before dawn, as the village lay in slumber, the lion's head suddenly snapped toward the trees beyond the huts. Something was watching. Something human. Emily awoke to the scent of morning dew and the distant sound of cattle stirring in their pens. She stretched, yawning as she turned to see the lion still beside her. He hadn't left. In the golden light of dawn, he looked peaceful, almost regal. She smiled. "Good morning." The lion didn't react to her voice. Instead, his ears were pricked forward, his body tense. Emily frowned. "What is it?" Then a scream. She spun around, her blood turning cold. It came from the east side of the village. People rushed from their huts, confused and panicked. Emily grabbed her father's hand as he emerged, his face etched with fear. "Stay behind me," he ordered. They ran toward the commotion. Near the outskirts of the village, a man lay on the ground, clutching his face. Blood dripped between his fingers. Emily gasped. She knew him. He was one of the men who had attacked her. A deep growl rumbled beside her. She turned. The lion had followed. His fur bristled. His eyes locked onto the injured man. Her father grabbed her shoulders. "Go inside, Emily." "But now..." She hesitated but obeyed, stepping back as the village elders gathered around the wounded man. "Who did this to you?" one asked. The man groaned, spitting blood onto the dirt. His voice was weak but filled with fear. "Him," he whispered, pointing a shaking finger toward the lion. A ripple of shock spread through the villagers. Emily's father stiffened. "What are you talking about?" The man coughed. We came back last night. We were going to take the girl." Gasps. Emily's heart pounded. The man continued, his voice hoarse. "We thought she was alone, but he was waiting, watching. Before we could even get close, he came at us like a demon. He tore into my friend's leg. We barely got away." The village fell into stunned silence. Grandmother Miriam finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "This lion is not here by accident." The realization hit them all at once. The lion hadn't just saved Emily once. He had been guarding the village, protecting them from the men who had planned to return. Her father, his face pale, looked down at Emily. His eyes were filled with emotions she couldn't quite understand. Then, for the first time, he turned to the lion, not with fear, but with something closer to respect. Emily stepped forward, her voice small but steady. "He's not just a lion. He's our protector." The villagers, once afraid, now saw the truth. This was no ordinary beast. This was a guardian, a king who had chosen his people. And as the morning sun bathed the savannah in golden light, the lion sat tall and proud, watching over the village that was now his own. The village was no longer the same. Fear had turned into curiosity. Curiosity had turned into respect, and respect into trust. The lion had saved Emily. He had defended the village, fought off the attackers, and in the process had become something more than just a wild animal. He was one of them now, but not everyone agreed. A few days had passed since the attack, and though many had begun to accept the lion's presence, there were still those who saw him as a danger. "He's still a predator," one of the village men grumbled, sharpening his spear. "What happens when he turns on us?" "He had the chance," Grandmother Miriam replied calmly, her wrinkled hands tracing symbols in the dirt. "But he did not. He chose to protect." Others nodded in agreement, but some, like Daniel, one of the strongest hunters in the village, remained unconvinced. "This isn't natural," Daniel muttered. "Lions don't protect humans. They hunt them." Emily sat nearby, listening to the argument unfold. She knew they were scared. She had been, too. But looking at the lion now, resting under the shade of a tree, watching over the village, she felt no fear. She felt safe. Still, doubts lingered in the air. The elders debated well into the evening, some arguing for the lion to be chased away, others insisting he stay. Then, as if to answer them all, the lion stood. His muscles rippled as he rose to his full height. His golden mane caught the fading sunlight, making him look even more powerful. He let out a deep, rumbling growl, a warning. Silence fell over the village. Emily followed his gaze, her heart pounding. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking past them, toward the trees, toward the darkness beyond the village. Her father noticed it too. "Something's out there," he whispered. The hunters gripped their weapons, stepping forward cautiously. Then a rustle. Something was moving in the bushes. Emily felt her stomach twist. The attackers had returned. The lion lowered his head, his tail flicking, He was ready. Emily's father signaled to the other men, their spears raised, their bodies tense. Then a figure emerged. Not just one, two, then three, then more. Men, cloaked in shadows, creeping toward the village with quiet steps. They thought they were unseen. They thought they were hunters. But they didn't realize they were being hunted. The lion did not wait. With a powerful roar that shook the night, he charged. The men barely had time to react before he was upon them. Chaos erupted. The villagers shouted, weapons raised. But the lion was faster, stronger. The first man barely turned before the lion's massive paw slammed into his chest, sending him flying backward. Another lunge of knife. But the lion dodged, his powerful jaws snapping so close the man stumbled back in terror. The remaining intruders fled. The lion didn't chase them. He didn't need to. The message was clear. This village was under his protection, and no one would harm its people. The villagers stood in stunned silence as the last of the intruders disappeared into the night. Emily ran forward, throwing her arms around the lion's massive body. "You did it again," she whispered. The lion let out a deep, rumbling breath. Her father stepped forward, his spear lowered. He looked at the lion, truly looked at him, and for the first time he bowed his head, not out of fear, out of respect. The other men followed. Even Daniel, who had doubted the lion from the beginning, stepped forward and placed his spear on the ground, a sign of surrender. Grandmother Miriam smiled. "This is no ordinary beast," she said softly. Emily already knew that. She looked into the lion's golden eyes and whispered, "Your family now." And as the village gathered around him, offering food, respect, and gratitude, the lion lay down, not as a wild animal, not as a threat, but as a guardian, as their protector, as their king. The lion had become part of the village. No longer feared, no longer just a wild animal. He was their protector. The people accepted him, not as a pet, not as a captive, but as a guardian who had chosen them. For weeks, life in the village felt safer. The men who had attacked Emily never returned, and the villagers walked with a newfound confidence. And yet, peace never lasts forever. The lion's greatest test was yet to come. One morning, a group of strangers arrived at the village. They were not like the men who had attacked before. These men carried rifles instead of knives, wore boots instead of sandals, and had eyes that scanned the village like they were measuring it. Hunters, poachers, they had heard stories. A lion living among humans, protecting them, it was unheard of. To them, a lion was not a guardian. It was a prize. One of the men, a tall figure with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "We have heard rumors of a great beast living among you," he said smoothly. "We are here to take him." Emily felt ice run through her veins. "No," the villagers murmured nervously, some stepping in front of the lion protectively. Grandmother Miriam raised her chin. "This lion is not yours to take." The scarred man chuckled. "Oh, I think he is. A beast like that, worth a fortune. Or maybe too dangerous to let live." He glanced at his men. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." The lion stood still, watching. He did not growl. He did not charge. But his eyes, they burned with understanding. He knew what these men were, and he knew what they wanted. Emily's father stepped forward. "You will not take him," he said, his voice steady. The hunter smirked. "And what will you do to stop us?" He raised his rifle. The village erupted. Men and women alike surged forward, not with weapons, but with defiance. "We will not let you take him," someone shouted. "He is our protector. He is part of our family." The poachers hesitated. They had expected fear. They had expected submission. But the village stood as one. The scarred man's eyes darkened. "Then we'll take him by force." He nodded to his men, and that was their mistake. Before the poachers could react, the lion moved, faster than any of them had expected. A blur of golden fur, a roar that shook the earth. He attacked. One poacher raised his gun. Too slow. The lion's massive paw swiped aside, sending it clattering to the ground. Another aimed. But the villagers surged forward, knocking him down. The scarred man turned to flee, but the lion was already there, blocking his path. For the first time, he looked afraid. The lion stepped closer, his breath hot against the poacher's face. And then, he did something unexpected. He didn't kill him. He let out a deep, growling breath, a warning. He would not take a life, but he would never allow harm to come to those he loved. The scarred man scrambled back, fear flashing in his eyes. "Let's go," he barked at his men. "Now!" The poachers fled, disappearing into trees. The village erupted in cheers. The lion had won. That night, under a sky full of stars, the village celebrated. Emily sat beside the lion, stroking his mane. "You didn't have to stay," she whispered. The lion rumbled softly, closing his golden eyes. She understood he had chosen them, not because he had to, not because he was forced, but because he loved them, because animals in their raw, untamed nature could show something humans often forgot, true compassion. Years later, people would tell the story of the lion who protected a village, a legend passed down through generations. And somewhere in the vast savannah, beneath the golden light of dawn, a lion still watched over his people, his family, his home,